All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Design, Build, Hunt podcast, which is presented by Whitetail Partners. On the line with me today, I've got Mr. Jake Hendrickson from Whitetail Partners, Michigan. Jake, what's going on, buddy?
Not a whole lot, Josh. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Glad to be back on the show. It's summertime, and
Yep.
things are getting a little sparse here for the Whitetail Partners crew. Have you noticed that?
Well, yeah, it's a busy time of year. Just like we have those of us with kids. Like all of our kids are in sports. They're at that age, and uh, look, family vacations. I think one of our guys is on a cruise right now.
Yep.
And then we're also doing uh, land management work for clients, trying to get on our properties to get stuff done. I know my consulting season is winding down, or the consulting part of it's over. So I'm just working on land management at this point. So we're kind of, I guess, freeing up a little bit from the consulting part, but we're still going hard with land management and trying to get whitetail work done on our properties. Because really, our properties take a back seat for a majority of the off season. So this is kind of the first chance we get to actually work on our own stuff.
Yeah. You know what? I had Sam on last week, and again, flying solo with just Sam, and he said the same exact thing. He was like, "It's the accountant's checkbook, right? Like I've been neglecting my property all year long, and now finally I can get back to it." But there's still a lot of work ahead. We're still getting phone calls. We've still got folks asking how we can help them on their property. So there's still some work to do, but it's not quite the fever pitch that it
Right.
was for a little bit. And so, let's see, week after next, I'm heading out of town. I'm going to Canada, which for a pretty fun trip, heading to Banff. Pretty
Oh,
excited
nice.
about that. Yeah. So, we all schedule. I mean, this is the time of year we can do it, right? We're not
Right.
putting these trips during hunting season, and we're
No,
not putting them, and
no,
we're not
no
putting them.
weddings, no trips, no nothing.
Right. If you're getting married after September 1st, you better invite somebody else. Because I'm not going to be there. No, I'm kidding. I'll probably be there, but I might leave
I've
early.
skipped weddings.
Have you really?
Yeah.
Oh,
If it's a family wedding, I have to go. If it's not a family wedding, I'm sorry. I can't make it.
right. Yeah, no, I guess I just don't have enough friends who want to get married that I end up getting invited to too many non-family weddings. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, it's that time of year. We've all put our properties on the back burner. We've put our vacations on the back burner. So it's that time of year that folks are out, and so it's kind of hard to get the full crew in here. But I thought this was a great time to sit down with Jake and peel back the curtain just a little bit, learn a little bit more about you in a one-on-one kind of format here, and hear a bit about what your season has looked like for you, your consulting season, not your
Sure.
hunting season. Just because there are so many of us, and a lot of the things we talk about oftentimes are, how we do things differently in Georgia as compared to Michigan, but we don't necessarily go into what do we do different, like
Mhm.
what makes my season look different than your season. And
Yeah.
so I thought maybe we just kick it off and say, man, how has your consulting season gone, and what's the kind of rhythm that you try to stick with that works for you there in Michigan?
So yeah, this is hard to. I don't know when exactly. I can't even remember when I started this. I think it was like 2000. Oh man, 19. I started kind of getting paid for it a little bit. What it was like, but then I was like, oh, I'm making some money. So I think 2020 is where I kind of filed the LLC to make it official. And then last year was my first year with Whitetail Partners. So this is my second year with Whitetail Partners. But I think I've talked about this before in a podcast. What really drew me to Sam and to Whitetail Partners is just the the similarities that I had with how I was putting these plans together and how Sam was kind of doing it. Like we each look at properties in a different way, but our process, like with what we want to give to the client, is very similar. So we want to make sure we have a high quality plan. There's a lot of detail in it. It's not just giant food plot over here, clear cut over here, stand in the middle. There's a lot more detail in it than that, uh, and so that's what I really liked about Whitetail Partners is just the fact that it was very professional. You everything that we provide for our clients is the deliverables piece, and I think Sam has spoke to that on numerous occasions. But it's hard to find another consulting group that has more in the terms of deliverables than we do, and that's what really attracted me to that. But as far as like my rhythm, I try to schedule all of my consults from like January 1st up until about Memorial Day. So that's basically 5 months of consultations, and it's not. And I try to do one a week. So I don't try to just crank them out and just do one every day or couple every week. Like I really take my time with these. I try to spend as much time as I can on the property with the landowner and however many guys that they have hunting the property, and I take the entire next week putting together that design, that report, uh, and then we put together video narratives for these guys. Basically, it's kind of like this, where we're just kind of talking to the webcam, but we also have the plan pulled up on the screen, and we're just talking about it, like showing, okay, this is stand number one. This is how this stand relates to the property. This is how you're going to hunt this stand. These are the improvements that are going to make that stand better, and why. This is how you put those improvements in, and so all of those things together, that's the deliverables piece. I think is what sets us apart from a lot of the other uh, guys out there. But each one of those, a standalone would be awesome. But we kind of put all those things together, and so that's why I try to make sure I only do like maybe one a week. And I always want to make sure I deliver my previous one before I start the next one. Otherwise, there's just a lot going on in there. I like to make sure I wrap one up before I start the next one. But I try to do one a week from about January 1st until about Memorial Day.
Okay. I so this year I had a stint where because of the travel, I had several properties that were spread out about 2 hours apart, with the last one being in eastern North Carolina,
Hmm.
like eastern North Carolina. So I had 6 days in a row of consulting and being on properties. So when I got back, I had 6 properties to do.
Hmm.
And,
That's tough.
it is, and I knew going into it that I had my work cut out for me as far as noting everything and keeping track of everything. So I just I went way overboard, keeping notes, making video notes to myself in the field, taking tons and tons of pictures, separating those in my phone into separate albums. Like I went way overboard to stay organized because that was my biggest fear. Um, but boy, I should have known that my biggest concern should be the anxiety that I would feel when I got back and realized I had 6 reports to put together,
Yeah,
because the amount of work that, like you said, you take an entire week to piece one together. I mean, there's a lot that goes into these designs. And when
yeah,
I sat down and realized that I had 6, total properties, totaling about 1,000 acres, a little over 1,000 acres between the 6, and I had to put together 6 separate plans. I was like, wow, there's a lot going on here. So I like your rhythm of one a week, but
yeah. I try to,
uh,
and like it's different for everybody. Like everyone's going to have a little bit of a different rhythm with that. But that's just what has worked for me, over the past several years of doing this, and so I kind of just I stick with it. Um, that's always been like a comfortable pace, and then I kind of, most guys they like to do it on a Saturday, and some guys want like a Sunday or something like that. So kind of, do a consultation on Saturday, get there early in the morning. Sometimes you meet them for breakfast at a diner. Sometimes you meet them at the camp for breakfast there, and then you just kind of get to walking, and you spend as much time as you need on the property. But yeah, then that entire uh, next week is putting that plan, whether it's the design piece, the report piece, or those videos, which can be a couple hours in length depending on the property. Then all that together then gets sent over to the client. So yeah, I try to make sure to
right.
to do one a week. That way I don't end up buried and completely swamped and end up like making a video for the wrong guy.
Oh man, I had one client this year that I called him by the wrong name. And
Oh no.
it was so because I had just had a guy and they looked so similar and they were both in construction. And so I mean, and luckily I caught it. I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. But, yeah, it could get hairy real quick. But, I feel like, this was kind of for many of us, kind of a breakout year. You've been doing this for a long time, right? But for me, I've been doing it for a couple of years. This is my second full season with Whitetail Partners. Um, but the number of clients that I've served this year far exceeds the number of clients I served last year. Um, but with that, I feel like because I'm relatively young in my career as a habitat manager, I'm learning a ton
Hmm.
from pretty much every property that I'm on. And I think that's probably always going to be the case. If I ever stop learning, then I'm probably not doing my job very well as a consultant, right?
Right.
But I'm curious, somebody with your experience, what you would say, lessons you learned from this past year, or, is there a specific property that taught you something, or a landowner even that taught you something, or maybe even something that humbled you a little bit, ooh, that that didn't work out like I thought it would, or didn't turn out like I thought it would. Anything like that from your season that we can maybe learn from?
Yeah, so there's a lot that, like you said, like the more you do it, the more you're going to learn. And like with me, like I guess there's a couple things that I always try to go into the season, like I'm gonna try to learn this or learn that. And for me, it's a lot of times it's like plant species identification. And like really, like in Michigan here, there's like a handful of trees here. There's not that many. So really, after you've been doing it for a little while, if you say I'm going to learn 5 trees every year, you go several years, and by the you're going to learn all the trees. So there's very few
Right.
trees now that I cannot identify. But like when was you know maybe not doing this, or just in the infancy, like yeah, you would go through the woods, and you're like I wouldn't be able to identify this tree or that tree. Like I could identify like a maple or an oak, but trying to like maybe just I'm trying to think of one here, maybe like a basswood, like just from the bark. It's like, okay, but now I can just pick it out. Like I just like, okay, there's a basswood over there, and this is what that tree does, and what it might be good for, and what it might not be good for. And so I try to learn that every year, whether that's with shrubs or with trees or with forbs, things like that, because you want to be able to identify, invasives, which ones are the desirable species, which ones might be harder to get out of your food plot than others, like which herbicides might work on some than others. And so like I try to continue to learn things like that, and then also maybe reinforce things that this is one thing that you'll see a lot, is like you'll see a lot of consistency. So how deer use terrain, like the deer use hills in a very similar way on every property. Deer
Right.
use cover in a very similar way on almost every property. Deer use uh, whether that's like around a pond or lake, like that's an easy one. Like they're just going to skirt the edge of it. Some things that I guess um, maybe humble you is like they don't always do it exactly how you think they're going to do it. So
Mm,
you might say, okay, well here's a pond and here's an open field. We have a section of timber or cover in between the two. Deer should be cutting through it in this way, and so you kind of explain that to the client, you when you're walking through, and like, okay, we're gonna probably find a trail around in here, and it's not there. You're like, well, what the heck, like it's got
yeah.
to be here. And so then you might have to move 20 yards one way or 40 yards the other way, and eventually you will find it. But like, so that's something that's different on every property. That's like maybe how they use it, where maybe it's off by just a little bit, and then there's probably a reason why. And you might walk a little bit further down, and you see a giant tree that blew over. And then that's what pushed that trail to the side. And you're like, okay, well, this is maybe why this trail got moved over, you know, because of the tree that basically created a blockade. Um, I'm trying to think of, there was another, so that and you talked about maybe some challenges. One of the, we talked about this kind of before we got on. One of the more challenging properties that I was on this year. There's always going to be every property has its challenges. That's why guys reach out to us, is because they're stumped, right? They don't know what to do with a certain property. And I had one guy reach out to me. His property was very wet, and he didn't know what he could do to improve it. So when we got there, or I guess just doing like the pre-scout, like you're going through the historical images of the property, and you can see like, yeah, this thing is wet. Like it's depending on the time of year, you're standing in water, and so it's kind of difficult to know what the uh, weather is going to be like on any given year. During the fall, you could have standing water in the fall, so it's difficult to like. So from that standpoint, when we go to a property, we want to try to incorporate bedding areas. We want to try to, you know, move deer through the property with a trail system. We would like to plant food plots, right, to draw deer to certain stand locations like that. That's really the pattern, the bed to feed pattern that we're hunting every day. And on this property, it was very difficult to find a place to put any food plots because
Mhm.
the entire parcel was practically underwater. There was maybe like a half acre right by the road that was dry, and so that was going to be an area where we could isolate for food. But other than that, you couldn't really do much in there for food plots. So what we ended up doing was bedding and trail creation very similar to other properties, but for the food we were going to use, and I think we had talked about this on this podcast a few times before, but we use concentrations of red dogwood, which grows very well here in Michigan. This was kind of like a northern Michigan area. It grows very well, and it grows well in wet soil, and deer really love it. They love to browse on that red dogwood, and so we were going to put concentrations of that near stand locations, near certain little high spots that we might be able to get some food. So maybe like a 15th of an acre or a 20th of an acre, just small areas where we might be able to throw down some clover, some like
Mm,
really
yeah,
wet tolerant clover, and then surround it with this red dogwood. And it's going to take some time to get established, but that's still going to act as a draw and work these trails kind of right through it past our stand location. So
right. So
that was
maybe
that
not
was
like a true like destination food source necessarily, but certainly a concentration area where they will have food available and
right.
it'll kind of concentrate that movement. What's the what's the clover type that you're planting and recommending for these really wet areas? I feel like that's a common question that I hear a lot is, actually there are two, and one I was fielding from a guy just the other day actually. So we'll talk about this one or that one second, but and what's a good clover for like a wetter location?
So I kind of go with a clover called L-site clover. It just likes wetter soil. So I've and a lot of times like when I'm putting in these really small poor man plots or kill plots, they're kind of in my properties. They're always next to like a swamp, or they're on through this thick cover, and it's always wet. And so that's the clover that I've kind of gone to that has performed well. It's not that other clovers won't grow there. Like you can still get ladino clover to grow in there, but if it gets flooded out, that L-site clover that just responds the best to wet soil. So that's what I recommended in this one is the L-site clover.
Yeah. What about, so this is the question that I just got the other day in a text message, actually. Someone was asking about my opinion for different species of clover for pretty shaded areas. He had gotten permission on a new spot, and um, there was some fields that I guess used to be like cleared as a food plot. Now it's pretty shaded out. He doesn't know whether or not he'll really be able to cut much to kind of get some sunlight to the ground. So a really shaded area. Any kind of clover that you're going to be trying to throw in there?
So I guess it kind of depends on what does it mean by shaded. So there's like there's full sun. Obviously, that's what most food plots like is full sun. Then there's partial sun or partial shade, and then there's like maybe full shade. I'm not really sure that much grows in the full shade. The best one, if that was what you had to work with, and there was nothing else that you could do, it's this full shade. You're going to go out there with a leaf blower and blow the leaves out and open up a spot. Maybe Dutch clover, that's the stuff that grows in your yard. At least here in Michigan, that's the stuff that's in your yard. It's this
Right.
really short clover. It can take a beating from like traffic and all that. It's pretty browse tolerant. I don't know if it's the highest on the preferred list for deer. I know they'll eat it. It's a clover. It's a white clover, but I know it grows practically anywhere, and you can't get it out of your yard. And there's some yards that are pretty shady. So that's what I'd go with is the Dutch
Okay.
clover. But again, like if depending on how shady it is, if it gets no sun, that it might not do too well.
Right. Right. And I don't know if your experience is similar to mine, but, planting clover, I feel like it's just kind of been a toss up. You plant it in an area where you may have two areas that appear to be getting the same amount of sunlight, and one does really, really well, and one gets kind of more shaded out. And it's kind of like, what was the difference? I don't know.
A lot
You
of
know,
times, like when I'm in a food plot, especially on a client property, I am always looking south. Like that's the thing that is going to
Right.
shade your property out the fastest, especially in the fall, is what's growing on the south side. So
Yep.
if you got a bunch of big trees on the north side, that's not as big of a deal because the sun is going to be lower in the sky and it's going to shine right through the southern side. So those northern trees aren't going to bother it as much. Now those big trees are still going to suck up moisture from your food plot, and so that's a big deal. So if you got just giant trees surrounding your food plot or in your plot, and you're wondering why your food plot's not performing, a big reason might be because those huge trees are soaking up all your moisture. I had a client that had that this year. He had a pretty good size food plot. It was getting good sun, no leaves in it. Like I think he took care of his leaves, but it was so sparse. Like he threw down a bunch of rye, a bunch of clover, and it was like I was like I was almost wondering like if he planted it because it was hardly there. But like looking at it, like he had giant oak trees in the
Mm,
middle. And those oak trees were just sucking up the water. At least, and it was a sandier soil, so it's not going to hold water well, anyways. So I
right.
told him like you gotta one take care of the trees on the south side, but two, like you have a lot of oaks here. It's okay to cut some oak trees down, especially the ones in your food plot, because these are one taking up sunlight, but two, they're soaking up all your water. And
Yeah.
whatever you plant in there needs water, and it's not going to rain that much to where it's going to be able to support that those several giant oak trees and your food plot.
Right. Right. Brings up a good question for me. So like there are situations where, and I'm thinking about a client property in North Carolina that I was just on. We selected in a large food plot. So this property has not had a food plot. So we put in a large food plot that's pretty narrow, only about 20 yards, but it's a very long, narrow kind of food plot, right?
Yeah.
And in that food plot, we did leave some oaks along the edge. And then we actually, in a couple spots, left an oak in the actual plot. And the reason we did that is because, we wanted some variety. So we left different species in and around there, depending on which one is going to be dropping that year. With a food plot, though, how are you making that call whether or not it's an oak tree that you're going to keep? Like if you have one of my favorite plots has a prime white oak right in the middle of it, and we shoot deer underneath that thing all the time. But you know what we don't have growing underneath it? Any of our food plot.
Right.
We know that circle is not going to grow. So, how do you gauge that, like whether you're going to leave a tree or take a tree when it comes to being something attractive like a white oak in your plot?
So I guess there's two things. The first would be the size of the food plot. So if it's a big food plot, you're probably okay to have a tree in the middle or a couple trees within that plot. Like if it's a acre in size or maybe a little under an acre, you can still have a tree in the center and have room around it for food plot. Uh, but if it's a smaller plot, like half acres, maybe as big as you'd want to go with a tree in the middle. Like let's say you have a quarter acre food plot and you have a big oak tree in the middle. That oak tree could almost take up your whole food plot, and then those roots
Right.
underneath are going to reach to the edges of it. It's going to soak up all your water, and then depending on where the sun is, it's going to shade it out. So size of the plot is a big deal, and also what type of like how many oaks, I guess. Like let's say it's an oak tree in the plot. How many oaks are on your property? So for
Right.
for me, like I have a lot of red oak on this property, so I have no problem cutting, girdling, getting rid of the red oaks here because I have so many red oak. The flip side, I don't have very many white oaks, so I'm very careful when I want to, or if I'm going to cut a white oak down, because I know that that's such a huge draw. And I do have, like, I'm doing something very similar to what you just described. I have about a 20-yard, wide food plot that stretches about 100 or 120 yards. I girdled every single red oak within that food plot, so it's getting full sun. I've got a bedding area on the south side, practically full sun. So everything from the bedding area to the north side of the food plot is full sun. However, there's a couple. I'm extending it the last 50 yards this year, and within that last 50 yards, I've got two or three white oaks in the middle. And I
Mm,
know that if I don't cut those trees down, my food plot is going to suffer around those trees because again, it's going to shade them out. 20 yards wide is not that wide.
right.
You know, the food plot is just not going to be able to survive that. It's going to maybe some years if I get a ton of rain, but most years it'll probably just be dead under those white oaks. But I just gotta see like how are those good producing trees? You know, if we get a really good acorn year, is it really going to be that big of a draw? So I might cut them down, but I'm not going to yet. Just again because I don't have very many. If I
Right.
had a lot of white oaks, no question I'd cut them down. So
Right.
it kind of depends on two things: size of the food plot, and also how many trees. Look, of the trees that are in your plot that you are thinking about getting rid of, how many other ones do you have? Like if you only have a couple, you might want to save them because again, you want that diversity factor. But if you have tons of them, then I wouldn't even hesitate. I would cut it down.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I think it all comes back to what do you have on your property.
Yep.
This same client, for instance, we were working on bedding areas, and in this one large bedding area, we were cutting down a lot of oaks, including white oak.
Mhm.
And he's like, "Are you sure we don't want to leave these white oaks?" So I was like, "No, we want the sunlight to the ground." Well, why don't we want the white oaks? It's like, just look out, look around you. I felt like what was the movie Lion King when Mufasa was showing Simba like you're going to rule as far as you can see. I was like, you've
Yeah.
got white oaks as far as you can see out in front of you. You don't need to keep them. And actually cutting them in a place like that could allow for some oak regeneration that's not happening because he's got such a closed canopy forest across the rest of his property with all mature white oaks. So
Yep.
last question, and then I'm going to let you go. When it comes to, you mentioned you girdled these red oaks, right?
Yep.
Um, when it comes to girdling, are you, which basically, if you don't know what girdling is, it's cutting through just the outer layer of the tree. You're cutting through the bark and the cambium layer of the tree, effectively killing the tree. So there's a couple of different methods. You can girdle it, that is one ring cut around it. You can double girdle it, which is two rings cut around it. You can girdle it and then spray it with a herbicide, something like a imazapyr, triclopyr, something like that. What are you doing for yours? I have a lot of guys ask me, you know, should I use herbicide? Should I not use herbicide? What are you doing?
I just double ringed it. So I
Okay.
just went around to every tree, and these are old trees. These are maybe 20, 24 inches and across. They're big trees. So I
Right.
didn't want to. The reason I chose to girdle is because I just don't have time to drop the tree and then get it out of there. Each tree would take me forever to do that. So I just did the double girdle, double ring it. All the large red oaks within that food plot section, and then there's a lot of smaller trees in there, smaller maples, smaller basswood that I'm dropping and then sectioning them up and then just getting them out of there so I can get full sunlight. And then over time, like they're just standing dead, drying there. So over time, I just cut them down and block them up for firewood. We burn wood here, so none of the wood goes to waste. But the
Right.
biggest thing is that sunlight. And so I did it in the dormant season. So I think I went out there in early March, maybe mid March, and I did that. And then they after I did that, they never leafed out again. So
Oh
this is
wow. So you got a pretty quick kill out of it.
oh yeah, yep, it was one and done. So
Good.
the previous fall, obviously they dropped all their leaves. I knew where my food plot wanted to go. I kind of flagged it all out. And then every tree that was within my food plot or on the southern side of my food plot got either girdled or taken down. So all the trees within my bedding area, I dropped to the ground because I did not want these trees to fall down with the wind. Like
Right.
if I girdle trees in my bedding area, eventually they're going to fall down or I'm going to cut them down. And I did not want that to happen after I hinge cut trees because then
Right.
that destroys my hinge cut. So every red oak in my bedding area that I left some standing in my bedding area for food,
Right.
but all the ones that I didn't kill, I just dropped them, and then all the ones in my food plot, I just girdled, so I wouldn't have to worry about taking or blocking them up. I just girdled them, cleared out the plot, and then I planted it. It worked out really well. Like
Right.
it's basically full sunlight. So an area that was 100% closed canopy forest now is full sun.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I talk to a lot of guys who are hesitant to use herbicides. They just don't want to risk it, right? And I don't blame them.
Hmm.
And so I always tell them that double girdle is really, really effective. It's rare that you're going to have a tree that lives through it. If it does, just go girl it again. Like, what do
Right.
you really lose by that? So, not a problem. When I'm doing land management for somebody and I'm terminating trees on their property, I will use a herbicide oftentimes, and that's usually on a tree that I need. I need these trees to be dead, because I don't need
Right.
a call in 6 months or a year that says, "Hey, that tree lived through the girdle that you did." Well, 95% kill rate's not good enough for the
Right.
guy who's trying to do it as a service. You know what I mean? It's good enough
Yeah.
for you as a landowner, but it may not be good enough for the guy that you're paying to come out and do some of this work. And so I'll use it in that instance, with just a girdle and spray. But there are times, I mean, even this past week, I was on a property in eastern Georgia, and we were cutting some trees, and we did a lot of double girdles for multiple reasons. One, we were cutting a tree that we knew the herbicide that we were using had about a 50% kill rate on this specific tree.
Mm.
So I figured, hey, my chances are better with a double girdle anyway. I don't feel like carrying a chainsaw and a squirt bottle and wearing rubber gloves the whole time. So I'm just going to run through here and do a double girdle. I'm going to have a better chance of killing this tree. I'm saving $400 in, imazapyr, which is a very expensive herbicide. I can just
Right.
use a trincapyr on the trees that I need to. I can double girdle the ones that I want to get a better kill rate out of, and I'm not, spraying chemicals back into my face when I splatter it off the tree. And, my wife's not wondering why I come home with blue spots on my face. Like, what were you doing to get blue spots on your face? It's like, oh, that's the dye from the herbicide that I use, hun. She
The
really likes
poison.
it. Yeah, yeah, that's the dye that I put in the poison that I spray on trees. Like, oh, and it's in your face. Great. I'm really happy about that, Josh. So, anyways, well, Jake, man, thanks for joining me today. This was awesome. Great conversation. I think we got into some really good nuggets there. I don't really know what to title the episode, but
Me either. It started out as like consultation wrap up, and then we got into like girdling trees.
right. Man, I'll be honest with you. Forest stand improvement is one of the things that fires me up the most,
Mm.
because if a guy will just learn about forest stand improvement through girdling trees or just clearing some things, he can make huge differences to his property. Like, it might be one of those best bang for your buck kind of habitat improvements, learning to do some FSI.
Yeah, I
But
think one of the biggest things that guys that they can do to their property, and it relates related to FSI, is just try to get sunlight to the ground. Like when you
right.
think about
Yep.
all of the habitat improvements that we're trying to install on our property, whether that's a food plot, bedding area, travel corridor, there's one thing that each one of those habitat improvements needs to be successful, or to grow, and that's sunlight. So
Right.
the more sunlight you can get to the ground, whether that's felling trees, hinge cutting trees, girdling trees, using herbicide, pick your method. That I would say that's like one of the most important things you can do to your property, because that's going to provide cover for the deer, food for the deer, security as they move to and from the different points on your property. It's going to allow you to get through the property easier because it's not wide open. I'm
Right.
not saying clear cut your whole woods. That's where having a plan comes in, because you wanted to have this in certain locations. You don't want your whole property clear cut, but
Right.
that's within those areas that you do want to have those improvements. Sunlight, I think, is the biggest thing.
Right. I'm really excited. We've got a property here in Georgia where we are about to do a bunch of mini clear cuts, because
Mhm.
we're doing just industrial scale, habitat management on this
Right.
property. And we're going to have a bunch of mini clear cuts just scattered through the property. It is going to be phenomenal.
That's cool.
Absolutely phenomenal.
Take a lot of pictures. That'll be fun to see the before and after.
I've got to get a drone guy out there. I don't own a drone yet, but I've got to get a drone guy out there to do the before and after, because it's going to go from mature oak hickory closed canopy forest to a patchwork of prescribed fire and a patchwork of, you know, uh, small clear cuts scattered throughout the property. So it's going to be really, really nice. But Jake, man, thanks for joining me today, folks. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, go check out our YouTube channel as well as our website, where you can find a lot more cool stuff from us.